everyone, and welcome to the SSPI podcast by Space and Satellite Professionals International. I'm Tamara Bond-Williams, Executive Director of SSPI. Today, we begin a new series with ST Engineering iDirect, exploring the trends, markets, and applications that are reshaping connectivity across Europe. Europe is one of the most diverse and demanding regions in the world for satellite communications, where government priorities, commercial ambitions, and the need for resilience all intersect. Today, we're going to look at macro trends from regulation to customer demand, disaster response and recovery, government military needs, and mobility. And to launch this series, we're joined by Craig Bowley, Regional Vice President of Sales for Europe at ST Engineering iDirect. Craig has spent more than a decade helping iDirect expand its reach in Europe with deep experience in government and defense markets. He now leads sales across the region, working with customers and partners to accelerate growth in a rapidly changing landscape. Craig, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here and excited for what comes ahead.
Absolutely. Likewise. Okay, I'm going to just start with a minor correction. I have a sense that I've said your title not quite correct. What is your role with iDirect, actually?
Yeah, no, Regional Vice President of Sales for Europe is perfectly fine. I like to spread it to commercial activities because, of course, within an annual year, we do address, of course, marketing, exhibits, and supporting of our partners in other commercial activities aligned with sales, but not necessarily purely to sales.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. I knew I wasn't getting it quite right, but that's very helpful. Okay, well, I want to just jump right in because we've been having a conversation actually. We're going to be having a conversation a little bit later today at the New York Space Business Roundtable about Europe. And so this is a perfect kind of lead-in for me anyway. And of course, this will air shortly thereafter. So starting with the big picture, when you look across Europe, what are the macro trends that are shaping satellite and connectivity markets today?
Yeah, good question. It's an ever rapid changing landscape. But I'd say some of the macro trends that we're seeing in Europe, especially towards some digital sovereignty and strategic autonomy. The EU's investing heavily in secure sovereign infrastructure. We obviously know IRIS² is becoming more in the forefront of discussions with its aim to reduce reliance on non-European providers. We have a lot of multi-orbit innovation. Of course, we have some of the big operators within Europe offering MEO and LEO solutions alongside their traditional GEO offering, with the aim of obviously delivering a low latency European-based constellation. And we have sustainability and regulation. So recently proposed EU Space Act looking to unify rules in licensing, cybersecurity and orbital debris mitigation into that space as well. And then, of course, you referenced before, but their resilience and increased security. So I think that's becoming an ever more prevalent topic of focus, especially when we start looking at where the EU programs are going. I referenced IRIS², and behind IRIS² is a string of EU programs from GovSatCom program, and then more recently to the European Protective Waveform program, which is building secure interoperable networks for defense and critical infrastructure, which is coming to the fore and becoming more of a trend.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to do a thing. It's such a buzzword, and we've been talking about it. I mean, I was just, I don't know if you were in Paris. I didn't see you there, but I was at the World Satellite Business Week last week, of course, and it was already 2 weeks, 2 weeks ago. And of course, IRIS² was like the talk of the town. Can you kind of unpack that? I'm always cautious about buzzwords. I don't know if my listeners know what the buzzwords are, or what is IRIS² and why is Europe making this investment right this minute?
Yeah, great question. I think especially it's been on the cards for a while. So looking at EU programs and how the EU as a collective nation set of nations can produce a multi-orbit solution that gives resilience and reduces their reliance on non-European providers. I think
Mm-hmm.
quite key here. So I think obviously within it, they're looking at unifying the European Union in a more strategic manner that allows better interoperability between European nations in active duty and non-active duty. So you talked before about critical response and infrastructure requirements. So there's multi-layered, requirements responses coming out of IRIS². And IRIS² itself is led by, again, we referenced some of those big satellite operators within Europe of
Mm-hmm.
SpaceRISE Consortium, so led by SES, by Eutelsat, and by Hispasat. And then behind that is a whole host of European markets prepared to support and respond to requirements for that program, especially. So again, feeding into it is the European Protective Waveform. In there, you have next generation ground infrastructure and terminals that will be a part of that program. And then you're looking at future technology requirements, especially towards the use of 5G and connectivity for satellites. And that's where they're driving towards. And of course, the IRIS² constellation is going to be primarily used for Europe, in Europe and outside of Europe, where it has coverage. But of course, it's also going to be a commercial asset used by that SpaceRISE consortium to build on the commercial assets they have today in LEO and MEO orbits and build out that next generation.
Wow. It, it's staggering in its in its ambition. So it's I'm excited to see how it shapes up. Let me pivot a little bit. So you've been with iDirect for a long time, since 2013. I have in my notes, and you've got a focus on had a focus on government and defense. So with this transition in Europe, is this similar in terms of evolution of thinking nations and governmental entities thinking about defense, or is it different from other regions, and in how? And also, what is iDirect doing to adapt to this aggressive move in Europe?
Yeah, great questions. There's a few of them in there, and I'll try and unpack them one by one. So, first of all, yes, I've been with iDirect since 2013, so I was very fortunate to be with the company now for about 12 years. And in that time, I've seen some fantastic developments within the company. We've always been a bit of a leader in government and defense sector. Especially coming from rudimental, what used to be quite the priority of defense users, which was swap on the actual user side. So that's size, weight, and power. And iDirect has always been a leader in our remote technology on that side to make sure we had the smallest, most powerful TDMA remotes for end users to incorporate. And we've developed that since, again, with what we're calling the 450 software defined remote, which is going to bring software defined flexibility to tactical deployments. That's something that we've seen as an end user requirement for many years, software defined remotes. The end user ultimately wants one remote that they can load different waveforms onto. And coming back around to why this matters for IRIS² and European Protective Waveform, well, it means you can have an iDirect system deployed. You can have it deployed on a sovereign satellite, which is owned by the sovereign nation. You can have the European protective, so you can have an iDirect system with iDirect waveforms on that sovereign payload. You can
Mm-hmm.
then have the European protective waveform also loaded on the exact same remote, and they can switch between the two. And then you can have something like a interference mitigation software on there as well, like our Scissor product, which is something that we inherited from a company we purchased in 2019, Glowlink, and we
Mm-hmm.
incorporated into as a software adaptation to our remotes. So keeping our swap conscious design philosophy in place, but adding layers of resilience into it. So there's been a huge development over the last 10, 13 years in this sector. Like I said, we started originally from just looking at simply reducing that swap on the remote side to now needing more intelligent terminals, multi-connectivity requirements, different waveforms. The sovereign waveform requirement is becoming a hot topic, not just in Europe, but across the globe, as everyone's seeking those extra resilient waveforms to counter maybe some of the adversaries and cybersecurity concerns that these nations are now having. But of course, when you develop them, you still need to think about your interoperability with friendlies, how you're going to go to potential conflicts and still be able to operate as a unified unit, be that in the EU, be it through Five Eyes, be it through NATO. All of these different elements are going to have their own requirements on security. But ultimately, they have to find a standard that enables them for interoperability, which is a key buzzword that we have in this industry, but a very important one.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and so from what I'm hearing, iDirect with its various capabilities is enabling that interoperability. Let me just confirm that's what you've already said to me, that you're actually doing that work of enabling. But I caught on to what you said about friendlies, and it triggered another thought for me, which is that obviously the EU is not a country, right? The EU is a conglomeration or a federation of countries. Did I say company? The EU is not a country, is what I was trying to say. It's a bunch of countries, and they have differing national priorities. So that interoperability, I imagine that it has to do somewhat with that, because the same capability that the EU is hiring has to be functional across lots of very different national priorities and accessible skills, accessible bandwidth. I mean, how does that work? It just seems very complex to make that work across the range of all of Europe.
Yeah, you're correct, and I think it's a really interesting point that you've struck on, and it's about concept of operations. When a nation goes into a conflict and requires communications, you could be in there with different alliances. So you could be in there. Obviously, first and foremost is your sovereign capabilities. That obviously the nation will choose what platform, remotes, and connectivity they're going to use as their primary communication source. But then you've also signed up to NATO, for example. So you might have a NATO standard communications requirements. So you're going to have to carry a second terminal, a second box. And then you're going to have potentially European and EU requirement in there as well. So you're carrying a few different requirements on your communications side. And by having, say, the 450 software-defined remote, which is enabled to be able to load not only iDirect waveforms, but it's a true software-defined remote where we're willing to host our competitors' waveforms, other technology on there. It enables one remote, one terminal to be deployed, and then the end user can, whoever they've signed up to, whoever those friendlies are for interoperability, they can have the waveforms, they can have it loaded in the background. Like I said, the example being a sovereign nation who's chosen iDirect as their platform of remotes for primary communications, but also as part of the EU where they need European protected waveform loaded on it for interoperability there. And then NATO standards as well, whichever remote's chosen on that NATO standard to be interoperable, it can be loaded onto the software-defined remotes to simplify that deployment. And at the end of the day, you have to simplify the deployment in order to enable more important strategic resources to be taken beyond communications devices.
Yeah. I have to say hats off to you, because that sounds like a headache and a half. Just navigating the range of requirements and the way that they may or may not play nicely with each other.
You are listening to the Better Satellite World, the longest running continuous podcast in the commercial space and satellite industry. The Better Satellite World podcast is funded by the corporate partners of SSPI. Hughes, Axis Intelligence, the American Space Exploration Fund, and Qvia. Have you heard about SBQ? Space Business Qualified is a popular online learning program for industry professionals designed by JSOA, SSPI, and SatProf. To learn more, visit spacebq.org. And now back to the Better Satellite World.
When you think about, approaching a sale, or articulating, what the iDirect benefit is to a nation, or particularly to a government seeking to have a layer of defense, how are you explaining that to them so that it's easy for them to understand? Because I think you've now explained it twice to me, and I'm like, I got half of it. I think I understood half of what you just said. How do you simplify this, or how do you approach this so that the end user, your customer, recognizes the value and is able to readily adopt it and think about new ways of putting it to use?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it relates not only to government defense solutions, but generally in satellite communication solutions across the board. iDirect solutions can operate across multiple verticals and use cases and applications. And understanding how to best utilize your technology is something we pride ourselves on helping partners with and end users. So iDirect have a policy of direct engagement, indirect fulfillment for the majority. We believe in educated buyers, educated end users, because of that reason. Ultimately, iDirect systems are complex. They're very forward-thinking technologies that you need to understand how to best make the most of them in your specific scenario and setup. So ultimately, we like to educate first. So we're consultants, solution consultants first, to end users and to our partners, to help them understand what the technology means for them, but help us understand what they are looking for from the technology. Of course, not every single person is the same. You have a general understanding that a particular vertical, you could say one of the EU nations, sovereign nations, is looking for a defense communication setup, and we'll know roughly what they're looking for. But everyone has their own preconceived ideas of what they were looking for, what the kind of setup is that they're requiring. And we have to work out what that means for them. Are they looking at setting up their own satellites in the sky and payloads to go up there to operate on a sovereign system? Are they interested in sovereign waveforms, like the European protective waveform, but just for that nation? Because that is something that a lot of nations are starting to look at, not just a collective European one, but an individual sovereign communication as well. Like I said, for cybersecurity resilience purposes. And then also, are they beholden to any other standards and requirements? So WGS, for example, which is the US program, but extends out to multiple partners worldwide. That comes with very stringent requirements for certification and testing, which can be fairly restrictive on usage on particular platforms, and it reduces the number of terminals in the markets that are currently WGS certified that they can choose from, for example. But otherwise, we are here to advise them on what they can do with our system, what their choices are, and then advise how they can maximize their investments over the period of ownership.
Yeah, that's a smart way of going about it, is making sure, like you say, making sure that they understand what their capabilities are because they're deploying it with you. And I imagine it opens up worlds of understanding in terms of, hey, we have this capability, we can do these things with it that we hadn't even thought of before. Have you seen that? Have you seen some new kinds of thinking as the customers start using the technology, that they say, oh, you know what? Because the technology does this, because we have the connectivity across these different ways, we can now do something we hadn't thought of before. Like this. Okay, hello. Does this go into? Does it go into more civil, starting from defenses lend itself more to civil operations, or other kinds of ways that nations might take advantage?
Yeah, that's another great question. So I'm going to bounce back to a previous question you'd asked first, just to circle around on this. You asked what changes we've seen over the last 13 years, and I think this is prevalent because one of the biggest changes is investment into resources and knowledge that the nations are putting into. So commercial has always been there. They've invested an awful lot on service providers, operators, on understanding how to maximize space and space communications. But on the national side, the nation side, it's been a kind of a low end, last resort, in the corner type approach to standing up these networks. So not maximizing, not fully understanding. It's an expensive solution. They try to reduce that cost down. It's got a low budget. To these days, where space and satellite communications is becoming a strategic essential. It's a necessity rather than a nicety. So they've had to invest an awful lot in standing up space commands. You've seen it in the US. The UK have a similar space command in the UK, but also in France and in other top nations. They're starting to really put a lot more money into those sectors to make sure they have a clear understanding of how to maximize assets that they have, how to mitigate the issues being seen from interference from the adversaries out there that are cybersecurity interference. It might be in-space satellite interference that they're combating, and generally getting the most out of it, and how they're planning for this next phase in a modern warfighter phase, where they have to have a lot more data usage. They have to make sure there's guaranteed communications and way to retrieve that data from the very tip of the spear back to command, enable the warfighters to have that information in their hands. So there is a lot of different ways that they're utilizing this and trying to find ways to fit with what they're trying to achieve. There's a lot of consultation with industry. I think there's a lot more recognition these days that commercial industry has taken 2 steps forward, maybe beyond where defense was, because of course the original satellite communications was designed and initiated for governments and defense industries, and then it's born out from there into commercial. So commercials leapfrog them in that period, and I think now they're playing catch up and having to really get back to grips with understanding how they become leaders again and maximize investment into space and satellite communications.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's part of the conversation we're going to have at the roundtable today, is the transition from government to commercial. And what's not said when you say that is that then there's the transition back, right? There's the way that commercial then gives back to government entities, and it's such a fascinating cycle. I have a really weird question, and it's a little kind of off, but we think of Europe. I think of Europe because I'm from the United States. So when I think of Europe, I think of the major countries, France, England, and so forth. And of course, England's not even part of the EU anymore. But what about some of the really tiny European countries that we don't always talk about, like Malta? Is Malta playing in this space, or are they just relying on the EU major capabilities, or do they have their own space capabilities and are looking to build out?
Yeah, great question again, and good observation. You have differing levels of investment into defense budgets. And of course, if these are national defense communication requirements, for example, there's differing levels of capabilities based on the budgets that they have. So you can go from a sovereign nation, a first tier nation wanting to invest in multiple platforms and owned infrastructure themselves and trained and have their space commands, all the way down to just needing a connectivity link, which you can utilize one of the renowned European operators or global coverage to have a commercial connection. And again, another one of those trends that I've seen over the last 13 years is a lot of those nations, even what you might call a tier 1 or tier 2 nation, they used to utilize a lot more commercial capacity because you got a lot better global coverage with it, but also because there wasn't budget to spend on it. They used to look for obviously cost efficient ways for communication. And that trend has turned into security requirement first. They need secure communications because 10 years ago, we were in Europe, certainly more in a peacetime. These days, we're seeing adversaries on the doorstep and realizing the capabilities of those adversaries has increased tenfold from possibly where we thought they were or what they're able to do to disrupt and deny our capabilities in satellite communications. So I've certainly, over the last 5 years especially, seen an acceleration into what people are willing to spend to have assured communication links. And that also includes other connectivity links. So be it through multi-orbit solutions or through things like 5G, private 5G bubbles, and different ways of assuring that communication.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love the idea. It seems obvious, and I probably should have thought of it, but I love the expression private 5G bubbles because that makes so much sense in the climate, right? You're in this climate where, like you say, you've got multiple different nations and some of them are right on the border of conflict, one nation over is a conflict happening. And so having secure access to communications and connectivity is supremely important. And so it makes a lot of sense that nations are thinking about, well, how do I make sure that I have mine and it's intact, independent of what might be bigger and broader? Besides defense, though, what else are big buzzy things for Europe these days? And is there anything that's just brand new, like, hey, we want this capability, and it wasn't something that was being thought about a few years back?
Yeah, great. Again, good pivot, good question. Of course, defense is a big part of what we do here in Europe, but it's by no means the only thing. Like I said, we work a lot with the satellite operators. I feel like that's where a lot of the development and future thinking progress is currently happening. We're seeing things like the software-defined satellites starting to be launched and ordered. We're seeing, especially with people like Swister 12 in Europe, you're seeing the small geo satellites being put up there to patch black spots and patch over areas where there's a lack of connectivity or maximize bandwidth usage from their traditional satellites. They're being overlaid with these small sats, and it's bringing more flexibility and speed to market for operators and for customers, but it's also reducing the barrier of entry to not just your traditional operators, but maybe even to start looking at, okay, well, who could own a satellite? Who could be a satellite operator in this next 5 to 10 years by barrier of entry? You could be seeing more of those smaller nations. I'm not saying Malta's in line for one, but you could see smaller nations across the globe start to order these smaller satellites to have sovereign communications or to have critical infrastructure stood up, or for telcos even to start ordering them to look at extensions to their 5G backbones. So something here at iDirect that we're looking to do with our next generation platform Intuition is really have it with a 5G standard and backbone to it for future requirements and developments. It's obviously not going to start with 5G at the moment, but it's certainly something that we're working towards. And that's looking to really be able to plug into telcos with their 5G backbones and become a true part of that complex mix that a telco would use to answer and connect their end users.
Yeah, so that brings me to the other question, right? So as you're As you think about like the partnerships with the telcos, what other partnerships are part of this model that of deployment that iDirect engages?
Yeah, so a lot of it goes through satellite operators. That, like I said, they're driven towards that new market, new trends. We obviously have a big part to play in the areas where traditional terrestrial cannot reach. So we
Mhm.
talk a lot about iDirect's history in mobility. We play an awful lot in the global maritime market through everything from fishing vessels all the way up to high bandwidth requiring cruise vessels,
Mhm.
and then also on the aero side. But I think a recent trend that's starting to pick up a little bit more is satellite connectivity on trains.
Oh,
Land mobility in general. So having connected vehicles, obviously maybe for border patrol, apologies back to the government side, but it's kind of starting to broach that divide between defense and commercial, and you can see where a potential trend might go. So as you start to look at cars, connected vehicles, and you talk about the black spots we have into the traditional terrestrial connectivity links, and the requirements of, if you're considering let's say a self-driving car, well, you can't have black spots in communication links. You have to
yeah.
be connected in order to assure it. And the only way you can really get that connection truly is through satellites. So I think over this next period, there's definitely a review in the market. I know our CEO, Don Clausen, references it an awful lot on his drive from New York up to Washington. I think he goes through a 2-hour black spot where he can't get any connectivity through terrestrial links, and the only way you could plug it is potentially through satellite communications. But that also means future development of terminals, and those terminals that are in play at the moment, our traditional terminals, are possibly just too expensive right now. We have
Mhm.
to reduce the barrier of entry and usability of those terminals. So we have to reduce costs. And if you look forward to standardizing with 3GPP and 5G in the future, it's not only about how we can reduce costs and plug into telcos, it's reducing costs on that terminal side as well. Larger deployments means reduction in components costs, which will hopefully reduce the costs of those terminals, and even hopefully in future technologies, reducing the size of those terminals to a point where you could even install them onto commercial vehicles that are being used. So that's definitely an interesting one. Another sector is IoT. So IoT is definitely a growing area within satellite telecommunications. It's been around for a while. You would have seen big contracts, maybe in the US with John Deere being talked about, and certainly with offshore wind farms. But in those large areas where, again, you're lacking terrestrial connectivity, but it's essential for crops and harvests and monitoring, you're going to have to find a satellite connectivity solution in order to address it. So we're seeing a lot of new developments and a lot of new applications coming to the fore, and I think that's ever more so because of the multi-orbit approach. It's opening up new capabilities, new possibilities, and there's opportunity and potential for those that can think out the box and look forward and be able to start working on those future technologies, like iDirect with our Intuition platform. I think we have an amazing roadmap ahead of us. I think it's going to be an enabler for many new applications in the future. And we have a lot of smart partners out there who are all preparing business cases to utilize this technology in ways that maybe we didn't think was possible or a future of our industry 10 years ago. So it's in a very exciting time here in Europe.
Yeah. Um, we're coming to the end. We're actually at the end of time, but I have to mention this because it, I kind of was taken aback at the thought that I never thought about the idea of connected trains. We talk about connected cars, connected ferries, but yeah, especially it seems like to me again, speaking as an American, it seems like Europe has a much more robust relationship to trains, and so the advent of connected trains, or the expansion of connectivity in trains, seems like a no-brainer. But of course, I hadn't thought of it, so thank you for bringing it forward.
Well, in fact, that's it's a matter of pride for us here in Europe. We there's a particular fast train in between Madrid and Barcelona called Renfe. And if you're ever on that train, that is one that's connected by the iDirect system through a consortium of Hispasat, ACOX, and I believe Telefonica in Spain to provide that connectivity. And that's a bit of a special source of ours. Again, we do some things well here at iDirect, and certainly beam switching and fast mobility are two of the key things that we've done over our history extremely well. And being able to set that connectivity up to allow for tunnels and obstructions was one of those things we've done, I think, 10 years ago. So this is something that's been on the cards for a while, but I think it's becoming more recognized that it's a viable solution and a necessity for people on trains to be connected. And maybe those terrestrial links maybe aren't quite good enough anymore.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that is just a wide range of new capabilities, and I find it both fascinating and exciting. As you say, the advent of these multi-orbit platforms is just it's dramatically changing what we're capable of even imagining. So with that thought in mind, in terms of just sense of imagination, what excites you and what scares you the most about the future prospects of European space?
Oh, yes. Okay. So exciting me at the moment is probably the momentum behind space-based assets as a strategic advantage. And there's finally appropriate investment into not only the assets, but educated users and dedicated departments to address the needs of nations and individuals in the world. We always talk about connecting the unconnected. Well, I feel like we're getting closer and closer as we start to build momentum into this area. Multi-connectivity, you mentioned multi-orbit, but I like to think it as multi-connectivity solutions, because that incorporates other layers to it. It incorporates your terrestrial 5G layers, fiber layers, but also then satellite on there for resilience and security. But ultimately also a collaborative spirit across industry and government. I referenced earlier about the requirement for upskilling on both sides of that divide, and to collaborate together to get better solutions that solve problems as a unified piece, be it in the EU, be it in NATO, Five Eyes, be it in the commercial environment as well, as we look to those standards that we need to resolve. And the concerns, where are my concerns at the moment? Probably on regulatory complexity. It's one of Europe's probably hindrance, and if they continue down the route and it severely restricts the delay of progress, we could see the potential issue of fragmentation in EU-wide standards if they're not adopted quickly enough. The other one that kind of gets to me is, you would have seen recently, I think the German minister talked about how the satellites he was using for sovereign capabilities were being shadowed and by adversaries with unclear what they were trying to do with it. So that ability from adversaries to interfere and potentially deny access in space probably brings me the biggest concern.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are good ones. Well, Craig, I really want to thank you. You've been a fount of knowledge and helped me understand a little bit more of the complexities of what iDirect is doing, and how you're enabling Europe to meet the moment that it's in. And so thank you very much for being here, and I hope we get to talk again soon.
It's been a pleasure. Really, thank you very much for having me. And I look forward to hopefully meeting you in one of the upcoming shows.
Absolutely. We're going to be in London. We're going to be in London on the 1st for the Better Satellite World Awards dinner. And so perhaps you'll be there.
Fantastic. I certainly will. And I will see you there.
Thank you so much. We want to thank Craig Bowley for sharing his insights and for helping us frame how Europe's satellite markets are evolving. Today's conversation launches our European series with ST Engineering iDirect, focusing on the vertical markets shaping connectivity across the region and how satellite systems are quietly underpinning the way governments, industries, and institutions operate every day. Today's program is made possible with the support of SSPI's professional, student, and corporate members. We are especially grateful for our corporate partners, Access Intelligence, producers of Via Satellite Magazine, the law firm of Clyde & Company, Qvia, Hughes, an EchoStar company, and the American Space Exploration Fund. This episode is part of the Better Satellite World, SSPI's ongoing campaign exploring how satellite and space technologies support communications, security, resilience, and opportunity around the globe. To learn more about SSPI and our work, visit sspi.org and follow us on LinkedIn, X, and Facebook. New episodes of the podcast, including our Better Satellite World, Space and Satellite Futures, and She Reaches Women in Space series, are released every Monday. Subscribe at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, or on YouTube at SSPI Video. That's all one word, SSPI Video. For SSPI and our producer, Ari Yates, I'm Tamara Bond-Williams. And for the people and companies building a space and satellite future worthy of our highest aspirations, thank you for all you do.